Hello and welcome to another painting video. In this video, I'll be painting some Kruleboyz Gutrippaz, the battleline unit of my new army. Here I'll show you how I paint some non-green orcs with 3 varying skin tones to spice up a unit. Let's begin, shall we? I'll be painting the first skin tone with Rakarth Flesh. For base coats, I usually go with 2 thin coats. Then I shade the skin with Druchii Violet. Now I layer the skin with a mix of Rakarth Flesh and Palace Witch Flesh. Keep the purple skin in the recesses and try to follow the muscles. Next, I highlight the skin with Palace Witch Flesh. Don't overdo this step, less is more. I'm painting the second skin tone with Celestra Grey. And again I shade with Druchii Violet. Now I layer the skin with a mix of Celestra Grey and Biel-Tan Grey. And I finished the skin with a highlight of Biel-Tan Grey. On to the final skin tone. I'm painting this with Fenrisian Grey. And again, you guessed it, shading with Druchii Violet. I layer the skin with a mix of Fenrisian Grey and Blue Horror. And finally, I highlight the skin with Blue Horror. On all the skin tones, I glaze Guilliman Blue on parts that should be in shadow. Skin that's under clothes or hiding behind the shields. Next, I use Bloodletter glaze to glaze parts of the skin like elbows, knees and knuckles. I also glaze the face like the lips and nose. Generally areas where there is more blood flow or wear and tear. And here I have 3 alternate skin tones for orcs. I wanted to deviate from the standard green skin, and I think these models and these skin tones make them look much creepier. The Kruleboyz are covered in rags. I'm going to paint 2 variations. The first is painted using Incubi Darkness. Then I shade the rags with Neon Oil. The first highlight I'll be painting is Thunderhawk Blue. The second highlight is Fenrisian Grey. Then I use Black Templar to paint all the stitches. The second variation I paint with Mournfang Brown. Then I shade with Biel-Tan Green. Unusual choice, but this will give it an aged and mussy look. The first highlight is Agrax Brown. The second highlight is Deathclaw Brown. And finally, I use Black Templar again to paint the stitches. With these two variations of rags, I can add more diversity in the unit while still making sure the unit looks like, well, a unit. I actually use dice rolls to determine what I'll be painting per Kruleboy. Let's have a look at the shields they are wearing. Although I want the shield to be yellow, I'll be painting the shield with corn red first. Next, I dry brush Averland Sunset on the shield. I make sure it looks very crude, and I'll explain later why. I shade the shield with Seraphim Sepia. Then I go back with Averland Sunset, but this time I use a brush to layer the raised areas. Again, I do this in a crudely manner. Then I add a layer of Uriel Yellow, and I end with a highlight of Flash Gitz Yellow. The reason I painted this crudely is because I want to give the impression the Orcs themselves painted their own shields. I am pretty sure Orcs would not take their time to make sure the shield looks neat and crisp. I'll be weathering the shield later on, but first I'll have a look at the wood. The wooden shafts of the spears I paint using Dryad Bark. Then I shade the wood with Agrax Earthshade. And highlight the wood with Baneblade Brown. I love the Dryad Bark color. It gives the wood a desaturated and aged look. Now I'll tackle all the metal armor the boys have. First, I'm painting all the armor and metal bits with Iron Hand Steel. If I want some variation, I use Sycorax Bronze. This paint doesn't cover very well, so it is best to add a layer of Iron Hand Steel first. Then I shade all the metal with Agrax Earthshade. Then I shade it again with Reichland Fleshshade. This gives the metal a rusty effect. To add more rust, I first add Skareshield Brown in random patterns on the metal. I do not touch the weapon tips though. Then I go over the same spots again, this time with Troll Slayer Orange. You can also use Ryza Rust, it's the exact same color. Now I use a piece of foam with Runefang Steel to stipple random highlights on the metal. Finally, I add Tesseract Glow to the tips of the spears. The Kruleboyz use poisoned weapons. The Tesseract Glow adds a nice transparent sheen to the spears to represent that. Now to finish up the models with some small details. All the ropes and straps I base coat with Ushabti Bone. Then I shade it with Snakebite Leather. The teeth I paint with Ushabti Bone and shade with Skeleton Horde. The eyes I paint with White Scar. And finally I add Lamenter's Yellow to make the eyes shine. And here we have some Kruleboyz Gutrippaz. I really love these creepy looking orcs, and I think they benefit from not having green skin. I imagine my orcs living in vast caves deep in the swamp. They rarely see any sunlight and live in the dark. This is a good indication on how I will paint my other Kruleboyz. I will show you how I paint my swan bases in a separate video. Now I realize I'm using 3 glazes here that are discontinued from Games Workshop. I hope someone can tell us in the comments where to get any alternatives. I did hear the air paints of Citadel are a good alternative, but I have not tested this myself. Be sure to check out my Instagram where I post pictures of projects and behind the scenes stuff. But for now, thanks for watching.